Hi everyone, it's Melisa Arroyo back with you for another wellness video, and I have a special guest today.
Hi everybody, I'm Wolfgang von Latman-Lizana, also known as Coach Wolfgang VL on Instagram and YouTube. I'm extremely excited to be here with my friend Melisa. We've done many collabs in the past, and you are sure to really enjoy this one.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a special video on the mind and body connection. It is Mental Health Awareness Month as well as Physical Fitness and Sports Month. So I thought it'd be a great collab. And just so you guys know, all of Wolfgang's social media stuff will be below in the audio about section. What is it called nowadays? Description.
Whatever section it is down below the video. The description, okay. There you go.
Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. You could also ding the little notification bell if you'd like to receive notifications of the newest videos. And go ahead and subscribe to Wolfgang's YouTube as well. All right, let's get started.
All right, so in this video, I want to talk a lot about how your brain, the neurochemicals in your brain are created from the foods that you're eating. Okay, so a lot of people are unaware that things such as motivation, your happiness, your pleasure in life, a lot of these things are directly impacted by the foods that you're eating. Okay, so one neurotransmitter in particular, dopamine, for example. Dopamine starts as an amino acid known as phenylalanine. Okay, that's found in protein. It can be found even in things like bananas. It has in small amounts phenylalanine. So phenylalanine is the beginning precursor, and it is converted into tyrosine. Tyrosine is converted into either thyroid hormone through thyroxine, or it can be converted into L-DOPA, and then L-DOPA can be converted into dopamine, and then dopamine can be converted into noradrenaline or norepinephrine, both the same thing, just different names depending on where you live. And that can also be converted into adrenaline. And there are many other little side pathways that these neurotransmitters and amino acids can be converted into, things like cortisol, and even the endorphins can be created from this pathway. And even things like oxytocin are involved in this pathway. Now, can we screen share here?
Yes, you should be able to share content.
Okay, I'm looking for the little button. Oh, there it is, share screen. Okay, I'm gonna share. Boom. Okay, do you guys see that up on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so right here we have a graph that shows kind of not the beginnings of the dopamine pathway, but the basic outline of how the primary neurotransmitters are created. And mind you, there's many other that aren't shown on this graph. This is very, very basic. And this is number 2 right here, before tyrosine, we actually have phenylalanine that's not shown for some reason. You can, in fact, get tyrosine or phenylalanine directly from food. Tyrosine actually requires a rate-limiting enzyme in order to be converted into L-DOPA. And that rate-limiting enzyme is known as tyrosine hydroxylase, okay? And that's very important for preventing the overproduction of dopamine, in which, obviously, you probably know, you'll see in disorders such as schizophrenia. So that enzyme is very important. And just as a side note, there's a lot of evidence that shows schizophrenia could be caused by an overproduction of glutamate, which, as you can see in number 3, we have that pathway, glutamine to glutamic acid to GABA. What's not shown there is that GABA and glutamate are actually kind of like antagonists of each other. They're like light and dark of each other. So anyway, yes, this graph shows how amino acids are turned into neurotransmitters. So in addition to tyrosine and phenylalanine and the dopamine cascade, and this goes for all these other neurotransmitters, you guys, it's a universal principle. You also need cofactors to combine with these amino acids and be converted into their fully formed neurotransmitters that makes you feel happy, motivated, etc. Things like vitamin C, magnesium, vitamin D, and all of this is going to be unique to the step involved in this pathway. So if you do not have these amino acids from food, as well as these cofactors involved in each step of the way, which is a very complicated cascade, which is much deeper and more detailed than this graph, then you will probably notice an imbalance in your mood or your motivation, or some of the other symptoms that are associated with some of these neurotransmitters. So, dopamine. So we're talking about dopamine. Dopamine is my favorite one. So dopamine is commonly thought of as the, let's see, how do I unshare the screen? Stop.
The same place.
Okay, we got it. So dopamine is commonly thought of as the pleasure neurotransmitter, but in the last decade, maybe the last 20 years, it's actually been shown that dopamine is the primary neurotransmitter involved in motivation as well as addiction. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter of chasing, okay? So for example, you know, there's a lot of people out there that feel just completely unmotivated to go ahead and work out, or to do that college assignment or whatever it is that you have to accomplish during the day. Now, there's many things that could inhibit someone's motivation, but a huge one is an imbalance in the dopamine system. And one of the first things we got to look at if we think we have an imbalance in dopamine or serotonin or GABA is going to be, are we eating enough protein? At a baseline, optimal protein intake would be anything from 0.5 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass. And that is not just accounting things like muscle mass, but also amino acids required for enzymes, enzymatic processes in the body. And keep in mind, like I mentioned before, that rate limiting enzyme, tyrosine hydroxylase, that also requires amino acids, but dopamine itself requires amino acids. So your protein requirement has a lot more to do, it's a lot more than just muscle. It's all about amino acids, your energy levels, your motivation levels. So dopamine is required for motivation, it's required for chasing your goals. And you definitely need food in order to, you need the proper food. You need things like vitamin C from, I mean, there's a wide variety of sources, oranges, lemons, etc. And magnesium as well from these same sources. You can also get magnesium from the meat that you eat. And yeah, so pretty much all the neurotransmitters for happiness, for motivation, for feeling relaxed, you get from food. Okay. So from there, we also have receptor downregulation and desensitivity. So desensitization of the receptors themselves. Now, this might be a bit controversial for some things that can be seen as addictive. But when it comes to things like hard drugs or even a simple substance, a lot of people overlook, like caffeine, that tolerance that you feel over time is actually a desensitization of the receptors themselves. And typically you actually get upregulation of the quantity of receptors, if I'm not mistaken, just because there's desensitization of the receptors. The brain's not getting as much dopamine now because you're overindulging in an addictive substance. So the brain compensates by creating more receptors, which typically is why people get withdrawal symptoms and things, after they stop. So desensitization of these receptors can be caused not just by hard drugs, but, and again, this is controversial. There's a lot of information about this. If you guys are interested, just leave a comment and ask for more information. But things like sugar, junk food, hyperpalatable foods that simulate a lot of different texture and taste on the taste palate on the tongue. One of the main reasons why a lot of this so-called junk food is so addictive is because it can downregulate, or it can desensitize your dopamine receptors. And so what happens is at first you get this rush of endorphins and pleasure chemicals, which not necessarily dopamine, but you get a rush of pleasure from eating that sugar. And then every single time, like after a while, you start to crave it. And you're like, oh my God, I really need that sugar. You start to visualize it. And dopamine makes you chase more sugar. But the problem is every time you start to get a huge bolus of this sugar or whatever addictive substance it is, this could even be porn. This could be social media, like novelty, like scrolling through the news feed, or checking your notifications. Every time you check it, the degree of pleasure that you normally would get starts to go down and down and down to where you no longer get the same stimulus from that original pleasure. And so now you chase it even more and even more. And it's a never ending cycle of desensitization of the dopamine receptor, which means less and less pleasure, less and less dopamine release over time, and more chasing and more chasing. And so what is the antidote to this problem? Well, the antidote is the complete opposite. So in order to resensitize dopamine receptors, you want to practice more habits that delay gratification. Things like meditation, reading books, mindfulness, as Melisa always talks about. And obviously you want to quit the addictive habit, especially if it's like a drug. Unfortunately, depending on what substance we're talking about, that can be extremely hard, which is why we have awesome professionals like Melisa who can help you.
Yep.
Right. So the food another common thing that happens with junk food, especially things like sugar and refined carbohydrates, is not only that it can change your neurochemistry, but it also directly feeds bacteria in your gut that's responsible for digesting that food. So when you eat sugar, it starts to feed certain bacterial species and even things like fungus and things like candida that need that food to survive. And so when you stop eating sugar or white flour or whatever it is, what happens is that bacteria starts to die off. Now, what happens when that bacteria starts to die off is very similar to what would happen if any organism was not able to get its food. So my favorite way of explaining this to some of my clients would be, what happens when you have a newborn baby and you haven't fed it in a day? God forbid. I mean, that's a long time, right? Call
Yeah.
CPS.
I know, right?
But what happens when you don't feed a baby for a day, Melisa?
Obviously, it's gonna be crying the whole time.
It's gonna be crying. It's gonna be nagging you for food. So you can think of addictions to food or like your cravings to some of these foods as a baby that's like dying off basically and demanding you to feed it. That's pretty messed up, but it's exactly how your body responds. And so interestingly enough, if you stop eating these foods for usually the general consensus is about 4 weeks, actually within 2 weeks, clinically, you can start to see this bacteria dying off. Cravings go away after about 4 weeks of removing this food. So when you, and that's kind of like one thing that you can say against cheat meals, which I think cheat meals are okay, but as long as you keep that food in your diet, it continues to keep that bacteria alive. So those cravings will go away unless you have cheat meals once a week. Any questions so far, Melisa?
No questions, but just a comment, because I know you mentioned caffeine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you have to be careful though too if you are going cold turkey with caffeine, because your body does become dependent on it. And so the same thing goes with even hard substances. And caffeine is so normalized that people don't realize that they're actually dependent on it. And it is actually known, even in the mental health field, that is something that can happen. So try not to go cold turkey in some cases, because there has been some severe, especially if you're drinking a ton of coffee all the time, it can have adverse effects on your body if you're going to be going off of these substances.
Absolutely. And so, like I was talking about earlier, when you consume some of these addictive substances, which, by the way, I think caffeine's a very useful tool. I'm sure Melissa couldn't get through her school program without it.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
you know, and it drives a lot of America's night shift workers and things.
Mhm.
It's a vitally important tool, but at the same time, basically what happens is your brain starts to adapt to your caffeine consumption, and it adapts itself to be more conducive to living alongside the caffeine molecule. And so typically you get more adrenaline receptor sites and things like that that build up in the brain. And not adrenaline specifically, but basically when you come off of caffeine, all those adaptations are still there, but now the caffeine's not there. So you get an influx of all of these neurotransmitters and other things that couldn't get through before because that caffeine was occupying that receptor site, to put it kind of simply. The thing about caffeine, though, is that most people believe it only has to do with adenosine. And adenosine is supposedly just the neurotransmitter that builds up over the course of the day to put you to sleep. And of course that is mostly accurate, but at the same time, there's also things like adrenaline, there's dopamine and norepinephrine and noradrenaline, which also are produced from consuming caffeine. And also, like I mentioned earlier, glutamate. Glutamate is one of the body's main excitatory neurotransmitters. And if you have too much glutamate, you get what's called excitotoxicity of neurons. And so when you consume anything that's stimulating, generally glutamate is going to be produced and GABA is going to be suppressed. And that's also why a lot of people in the nootropics field will take a substance like theanine in order to offset some of the downsides of caffeine, because theanine produces GABA, which can lower glutamate. And so what I'm trying to get at here is some of the anxiety symptoms and stuff that people feel from freaking caffeine is probably not just due to adenosine. It's probably due to the glutamate and adrenaline that's produced. So yeah, so if you just come off cold turkey, you've got all this, either you're going to be extremely tired for a while, or you're going to be tired but wired. You're going to be like so exhausted, but you can't sleep because your adenosine receptors are all jacked up.
Yeah, I've tried not drinking coffee a few times for a few days just to kind of like, especially on my days off when I don't really need it, and my body's really like, what's going on, really.
Mhm.
And like you said, sometimes I'm like still like working like, at top speed, but I feel exhausted at the same time. But then at the same time, there's other days where I feel like I'm about to crash anywhere, and not driving crash, but crash as in sleep.
And I think a lot of people have tried to come off caffeine, of course. I think most people probably have. And when you try to come off of caffeine or coffee, you realize just how addictive of a substance it really is.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, this habit has only been, well, I've been working on my master's degree. So yeah, so it just really depends what's going on in your life. Sometimes you'll see that you don't really need it as much, and you're able to regulate how much caffeine you're taking in, versus there's times you're like, okay, let me just, and sometimes it just becomes a habit. Sometimes it's just part of the routine and you don't really realize that it's something that's really affecting you.
Right. Right. And I think a lot of people, they mistake the boost in stress hormones that caffeine can give as energy. And so they're used to being cracked out on like Bang energy drink all the time. Because I know people that drink those Bangs, they have 300 milligrams of caffeine per can just for like a morning drink, and they drink a second one for
Yeah,
lunch.
and 300 milligrams is what's like the highest amount you should be taking a day. And even then, for some people's bodies, like depending on how small you are,
Liver
it could
enzymes.
really,
Yeah.
yeah. So it could really, your tolerance level may be even small. Even if you are drinking a lot of caffeine, your body may not actually be okay with it in general,
Yeah.
as in the long run. So
Right.
that's something that just a warning, as a caffeine drinker, that's something that I also try to be mindful of as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so your body produces certain enzymes that regulate the half-life and the elimination of both of all things like drugs and caffeine and etc. And those things are going to be changed depending on your diet as well as genetics and obviously how big you are as well. And so you have some people that can chug 800 milligrams of caffeine a day and be fine, or even go to sleep afterward, right?
I know some people that are like, oh yeah, I drink some coffee and I could get to bed. I'm like, I cannot do that. And for the people that don't know what half-life is, do you mind explaining that?
Yeah, so half-life is the amount of time it takes to eliminate half of a substance. And then over time, you eliminate another half of that half, if I'm not mistaken. That's kind of like a, well, that's for me, yeah. So for example, if you take 400 milligrams of caffeine and the half-life is like 1 hour, which is not, it's like
It's eight.
6 hours,
I think it's
6 to 8.
8 out. 6 to 8. Yeah, 6 to 8
Yeah.
hours.
And it depends on the person. I see so many different numbers for that. But yeah, so let's just say hypothetically that you take a curcumin supplement from turmeric or something, right? And its half-life is 1 hour. Let's say you take 200 milligrams of curcumin, half-life is 1 hour. After 1 hour, after taking 200 milligrams, you're left with only 100 milligrams. And then after another hour, you're left with 50 milligrams, right? And then continue and continue. Yeah.
Yeah, and so basically that's your body breaking it down. So in
Yeah.
the simplest terms, it's how long it takes for your body to break down that substance so it
Right.
could be excreted in some way.
Yes, until it's
whether
completely
it's
eliminated.
sweat or pee or poop or whatever,
Right.
it takes a while.
Right. And caffeine is generally excreted through the urine and partially through the feces. So interestingly, so talking about caffeine, so obviously, we constantly hear there's plenty of population data, cohort studies and things that show so many different benefits to different caffeinated beverages. Okay. And one in particular that I want to talk about in this video is green tea. So green tea is very, very special because not only does it contain caffeine, which can stimulate you, but it also contains L-theanine, which I mentioned earlier in this video. And L-theanine, it primarily is this amino acid, like we talked about in the beginning of this video, that can actually produce GABA. It's a precursor to GABA. Some studies claim it also boosts dopamine, but I'm not convinced. I definitely don't feel dopamine boosting benefits from it, but it has been shown. But yeah, so you boost GABA with theanine. And so GABA is the body's main inhibitory neurotransmitter, helps you sleep, helps you relax, helps you concentrate. And so there's actually clinically proven benefits when you combine theanine and caffeine together. It produces alpha waves in the brain. And alpha waves are also produced in states of meditation and in states of mindfulness. Those are the brain waves responsible for what they call flow. And so that theanine alone, it also lowers blood pressure and has a whole host of other benefits. But that's just one major difference between green tea and coffee that has unique benefits to brain health. So people who usually feel too jittery when they drink their Bang energy drink will be better off like trying some green tea. Now, one other thing that caffeine actually has in it is it has multiple polyphenols. One of them in particular is known as epicatechin gallate. And I always get the acronym or whatever messed up, ECGC or EGCG. Epicatechin gallate, though, is the name for it. And basically what it does, it can increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. It's a neuropeptide that's responsible for basically organizing your thoughts. So if you think of your brain as a filing cabinet, brain-derived neurotrophic factors like the beautiful maid that comes in and just organizes all the files in your cabinet, in your filing cabinet. And so people who are all constantly stressed and they have like millions of things going on in their mind at once can strongly benefit from anything that increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, such as green tea or exercise or even Some polyphenols found in grapes also can do the same thing, and blueberries, anthocyanins or what have you.
And I love all those things, to be honest. So maybe that's my brain and my body trying to tell me like, hey, you need stuff to help you organize your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And things like turmeric, has curcumin, which also does the same
Mm.
thing. I mean, these foods are generally the ones that most of us really, really enjoy. So that's always good. Do you have anything you wanted to add on that one, Melissa?
Uh, Not necessarily, not in that.
Okay. Other than you like tea and you like blueberries.
Yes, yes, I do. And what else did you mention on there? I already forgot.
Grapes,
Oh yeah,
grapes.
grapes too.
So actually, now we're on the subject. So there's actually quite a few foods that have some very significant mood boosting benefits through some of these neurotransmitters. So one of my favorites is cacao. So cacao is basically raw, unprocessed chocolate powder. So if you've ever had baker's chocolate, basically it'll taste like that, but it's not even just like pure 100% dark chocolate. This is actually unheated and raw. And so when you consume raw cacao, if you brew it in coffee or what have you, make hot chocolate with it, basically it contains MAOI inhibitors. So MAOI, monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Basically, it is a enzyme responsible for the breakdown of neurotransmitters in the periphery. I probably butchered that. I know Melissa probably knows way more about that than I do, right? Was that
You're
kind of
doing,
on?
yeah, you're doing great.
Okay. So basically, it allows things like dopamine and serotonin to stay in the circulation longer. When you inhibit monoamine oxidase basically removes these neurotransmitters from the circulation. So someone who has like serotonin, depression or anxiety, they'll take things like Abilify. That was something that I was on for a while, which is a MAOI-A inhibitor, I believe, which breaks down certain neurotransmitters. So anyway, you can get these things from certain foods like cacao. And so other things in cacao are, it has a direct PEA, which is basically a derivative of phenylalanine, which is the first line of amino acid precursors to dopamine that can actually induce feelings of love, like oxytocin. PEA is like a precursor to oxytocin. So that's why a lot of people, they talk about how chocolate is like an aphrodisiac and it's like the food of love and stuff like that, because it legitimately in its raw form can actually produce oxytocin.
Mhm.
So it can also increase things like, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna say, that's why a lot of people go reaching for the chocolate because they're actually feeling the effects of it. I mean, it tastes great, right? But it also is giving us something on a level that we may not even know about.
Right, right. So a lot of people, especially if they're dark chocolate lovers, they're reaching for the chocolate, not only because sugar can increase endorphins and stimulate the pleasure, but also the cacao inside of it has these brain boosting benefits. And also it contains precursors, or actually cofactors that I mentioned in the dopamine cascade earlier, like magnesium is also found in chocolate.
Mhm.
So
And I want to add to that because you were talking about depression and how certain foods kind of boost certain neurotransmitters. And usually antidepressants, especially the newer ones like SSRIs or SNRIs, those actually have basically specifically are to change the brain chemistry in your body with the neurotransmitters, because like SSRIs are serotonin
reuptake
reuptake
inhibitors.
inhibitors, and then SNRIs are a neuroepinephrine. I can never say that one. So it's an inhibitor of that. And so basically, science is kind of going in that direction now with those new forms of antidepressants. And it's not to say that you should go eat a bunch of chocolate or a bunch of these foods without really consulting with the professional, but it's
Mhm.
also a way that your body could regulate as well. So remember, guys, always talk to professionals, especially because there's a lot of information out there, and not all of it is accurate, and all of it is different depending on you as a person. So maybe something is working for someone over here and you try it and you do not get good effects or effects.
Right.
So remember that, guys.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when we're talking about the mood boosting benefits of food and stuff like that, I mean, obviously, lots and lots of people. I mean, if you're on a psychotropic drug, chances are you have like a very severe, anxiety or a very severe condition. And so it's very important that we don't just go cold turkey off of our medications, or we don't think we're going to freaking cure our suicidal depression with chocolate or something. That's a lot what a lot of people will claim, like, oh yeah, I can't live without chocolate. I would kill myself if I didn't have chocolate. It's like, it's not exactly true, but with consistency, though, I will say with consistency, these foods can, if you're consistent and you follow a targeted protocol, you can modify a lot of these things that we talk about in this video. These the neurotransmitter cascade and things like that can be heavily modified through your diet. And I do believe that most people would benefit alongside proper therapy, whatever that is, whatever therapy you're doing. A lot of the reason why some of these drugs stop working after a while, or why they may not work in some people, might actually be because these people are not getting some of those amino acids from food and some of those nutrients. So these drugs might actually work even better, and talk therapy might work even better if we're consuming some of these nutrients.
Yeah, and let me go ahead and add in that usually what is recommended for people that are taking antidepressants or other medications, such as for anxiety or bipolar, is seeing a counselor, because there is studies that show that going to, talk, as you call talk therapy, going to see a counselor actually has an added bonus, and you're more likely to see results doing both than just doing the one. So
100%.
That's something to consider.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And those are things that I think we've already covered in other videos, but we'll cover even more in future videos, is the vital importance of talk therapy for these types of issues. One other thing I need to mention, though, that's very important, is that to the degree of effectiveness of some of these foods also equals the degree of possible interactions with some of these medications that people might be on. And that's very important to talk about, because a lot of mainstream information, a lot of mainstream health authorities and things might actually undermine how powerful some of these foods and herbs and supplements are. And that can be detrimental, obviously, from a beneficial standpoint, because some people might not be aware of the potential benefits. But even worse is the potential downsides. Because if someone believes that, for example, if someone thinks, oh, Siberian ginseng is just like rice powder, probably can't even see it.
There you go.
If someone thinks Siberian ginseng just doesn't modify neurochemistry at all, and they try taking it while they're on like an SSRI, I mean, there's serotonin syndrome, where you have an abundance of serotonin in the brain, and that can be deadly. There's obviously things like manic episodes. There's a lot of very bad things that can happen. So be very, very careful. If you're on medications, you should probably not be messing with anything too super powerful. You should talk to your doctor first. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, that's what they tell people taking, I think heart medication, not to drink orange juice or something like that.
Oh,
I don't remember if it's, or is it blood thinners?
If they're on blood thinners, because orange juice is high in potassium, maybe. So things like diuretic medications, maybe they need kidney failure, they need to avoid high potassium foods. If they're on blood thinners, they need to avoid vitamin K, because things like spinach and shit.
Yeah, so that's why doctors, I think that one's okay to say. But yeah, that's why doctors tell you to stay away from certain foods when you're on certain medication. And that's the same thing like you're talking about if you're taking antidepressants or medications that are mood altering. So
yeah. Okay, so just one more thing, since we're talking about food, is that certain foods can actually negatively impact certain neurotransmitters, and specifically, I'll just use the endorphin system as an example. So
Mhm.
there's actually quite a bit of evidence for this, and this is only some people. It's not everybody. But basically, the casein protein in milk. Okay, casein is the main protein found in milk, and it can actually occupy endorphin, or sorry, morphine receptors. Yeah, it can act like morphine, and it can occupy endorphin receptors in the brain, which can interfere with things like pains and even cause depression. The same thing can happen with the gliadin and gluten proteins in wheat. So obviously you hear a lot of stuff about like gluten and stuff, and there are some very serious implications with that. But what a lot of people don't hear about is gliadin. And so gluten and gliadin both can produce morphine-like compounds that can mess with the endorphin system, similarly to casein and casomorphine that's produced from casein protein in milk. So these are things you can definitely look into yourself easily, and they're actually more well established than many people know. So
Yeah, that's something I didn't know about.
yeah, and that might also be why people crave like macaroni and cheese. They crave pizza, and these things are more craveable than just like cheese by itself, or like who eats just like bread by itself. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people, but generally we
I
like the
mean, I have toast with butter, so I mean, it's
yeah, that's not
technically.
the same because there's no protein in butter. So
Okay,
yeah.
makes sense.
Do you have anything else you wanted to add to this?
Well, no, I think this is a natural ending to this subject, I think, right?
The gliadin protein of doom. You got it.
Yes. All right. Well, we're gonna have some other collaborative videos. We're gonna probably look the same because we're gonna be recording them one after another. So stay tuned for some other dates. I'm pretty sure we're gonna release these on different dates. I don't think we're gonna just
Absolutely.
bombard people
Your
with
newsfeed.
everything.
Right.
Just like new video, new video, new video.
We'll release them in a time-released fashion, just like the
Mhm.
new time-released Seroquel XR. I'm just messing with you.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, so remember to look in the comments for Wolfgang's information, like, subscribe, comment your questions or ideas or whatever below. And yeah, stay tuned. Did you want to add something?
At Coach Wolfgang BL. You can find me on Instagram at Coach Wolfgang BL, and as well as on YouTube, Coach Wolfgang BL.
All right. Catch you in another video, guys. Bye.